really our intention has been to connect and talk about relationships. And the reality, I'll speak for myself, the reality of relationships are that, to me, they're what life's about. It's where we share and exchange love, we receive, we get to express ourselves and be reflected and mirrored back. And without relationship, whether it's romantic or not, the fulfillment that I've experienced in my life is much higher when I have deep, intimate, powerful relationships and people showing up in my life, and people in whose lives I'm able to show up in as the fullest expression of who I am. And so amplify that to romantic partnership. And as a woman, while I'm, got to a really healthy place of being neutral around being single, my deepest heartfelt desire was to be partnered and in relationship. And having had wonderful relationships and not so great relationships, I have never been in a place where I was willing to settle. And yet I had lots of opportunity to grow, and arrived at a certain point in my life where I was very ready with inner resourcing, and in a place in my life where I had reached a certain level of success in my business and life, and I wanted someone to share that with in a really powerful way, to amplify my love, our love, etc. So Gabriella, your gifts of working with women, working with couples around cultivating extraordinary love on a deep level, is one of the most beautiful things that you could do, in my opinion. It's and who you are. For those of you that don't know Gabriella, she's an incredible coach that really creates such a sacred space to be seen, to be heard, to be reminded of this is my experience of just being your friend. But anytime we get into a conversation where I get to receive support from you, it's just I feel so uplifted and reminded of my inherent perfection and courage and the grace of living this life. And so Gabriella, you hold such a sacred and profound space for that to happen, period. And here you are, opening up your life and your business to support people on an even broader level around relationships. So can you share a little bit for those of you, for the people out there that may watch this now or in the future, who don't know you, who aren't familiar with your work?
Oh, I'm happy to. And thank you for your loving acknowledgement. There's just so many things in there that really touched my heart. And if you don't know me, my name is Gabriella Taylor, and I've actually been working within the transformational industry since 1994. So more of my life than not has been really dedicated to the practice of exploring everything from modern psychology to neuroscience to mysticism. I've spent a lot of time experientially immersing myself in learning environments, everything from a pilgrimage, multi-year pilgrimage around the world, where I lived in communes and ashrams and monasteries, and really this has been my path. But it's not been a path that's come easy, because what precipitated that was I had a near-death experience. I had an overdose, which had put me into a coma, and when I came out of the coma, I had had an awakening. But so prior to that, I had gone through years of really radical sexual abuse, and I grew up in an alcoholic home. And so I had a very, my heart was broken from day one. And so the process for me of learning how to repair, how to build trust, how to build a sense of self inside myself, how to continue opening my heart. But, for so long, I had men in relationship paired with pain and abuse. So, and I had this story about men, that men would always hurt me or men would always leave me. So then I would always call in men that reinforced that story. And so throughout my life experience, which is my best teacher, along with, all the educational platforms and degrees I've gathered along the years, I've really found, and I agree with what Erica says, is relationships are the cornerstone of life. And while I was at that time toiling through, on the outer level, so the mirror of relationship reflected back to me pain. Yet I had this deep knowing in my heart that I was made for something more than this. Like I just knew it.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward ahead to 2005, and I was coming out of a 7-year relationship and just going through a gut wrenching breakup. I mean, it was horrible. And I was back in the dating game, and like it was a mess. I was just making all of the mistakes. I'm going out on dates with men, and I'm like adapting myself around how I thought he wanted to be. I'm holding my breath through dinner. I'm lying, actively lying about if I wanted partnership, and if he was someone that was just only, wanting to date or be polyamorous or something like that, I was like lying. It's implying that I was okay with that. Like I didn't have a clue how to match what I already had in consciousness, because I'd already been within the transformational industry at this point for over a decade. And I had a lot of awareness. I was working with people, in a facilitation format, yet I didn't know how to bridge the gap and apply what I knew to be true and who I knew myself to be with men. And so I was at that time, I dove into, and you can probably, I don't know if you can relate, but man, I was like doing every relationship workshop I could get my hands on. Like I was reading every book I could come across.
Yeah.
I was like hungry, desperate, and I also had the strong calling. So it was a mix of all of it. And I just found that through that process, I was consistently frustrated because everything that I went to or learned was telling me that I needed to be a different version of myself. Like what I should say or what the rules were, how I needed to be with a man to attract the man or to call in the one. And I just wanted to be more me. I just wanted to actually, something inside of me knew that the more I was grounded in myself and connected to myself, that was the place I wanted to call in a relationship from. So while there were, gems in what I picked up along the way through all of these courses and workshops and everything, and I was also in the process of getting my master's degree in spiritual psychology, so I had a lot of tools in my backpack. I decided to create what I called my laboratory of love. So I spent a full year really. I'm a hardcore researcher. I'm all about the data and research, as well as I'm a mystic. Like I love I love just finding like what the common denominators are and tracking, probabilities and all of this stuff. So I just started researching myself. So I would go out on dates, and after dates, I had this tracking forms that I was working with as to how honest I was, how comfortable I was in my body. Did I kiss him too soon? Did I give the wrong, like, did I say one thing when I really meant something else?
Yeah.
Like, did I keep going out with him even if I wasn't into him? So I really committed myself to using myself as an experiment, because I knew that the way that I was relating to myself, the way that I was viewing relationship, the expectations or assumptions that I was running about men, like I knew like something had to change based on my inner framework.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout this year, I really dedicated myself to what I call transforming my relationship paradigm. It was my very orientation to relationship, how I showed up inside of relationship, the quality of men that I was or was not willing to dance with in that way. And it was extraordinary for me within that period of time to see like how the mirror of relationship, like the amazing men that started coming in, like
Yeah.
I was getting instant feedback, from life where, oh my God, all of a sudden, like I'm dating this man who's a billionaire and he just won this, like, not the Nobel Peace Prize, but like this huge, like global peace prize. And, the caliber of men that were coming in were exceptional. And after that period, within a few months, I met Nicholas. So it worked so amazingly for me that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm onto something. So then I spent 2 years constructing a program, and then 2 years of conducting over 1,000 hours of research interviews with women, so I could sort of gather, the evidence and compare it against my experience. And through those 2 years of research, I started to see a pattern emerge. And that's through what I saw the pattern was, I could see what the gaps were. I could see what I don't want to say solution, because we're not broken, we're not fit, there's nothing to fix, but I could see what the missing pieces were. So that's what I've created, the Journey of Extraordinary Love is my long-term program that I walk women through, which really is a phenomenal experiential transformation. And Foundations of Extraordinary Love, which we're actually starting tomorrow. It's my 8-week program where it literally gives us a chance to reconstruct our entire relationship to relationship and it's extraordinary. So, and I decided to bring this online about 6 years ago. So it's really been this process of, being behind closed doors, behind the scenes, walking women through this process that was just amazing. And as a result of answering the call, and I've got to say, Erica knows this, technology has not been the easiest thing for me to adapt. But so yes, so I've been sharing. I just have a real commitment to share this work because it works. To share it with as many people as possible because it's, coming back to with what you were saying, our world is changing. And the model of relationship that once worked for our parents, our grandparents, where it was much more of a model of survival needs or a model of just comfort and security, having a companion or a mate at your side. Like that model, it may have worked for who we were, but it's not the model for where we're going because I see around the world people everywhere, and I work with people all around the planet, all sorts of cultures, and I imagine you do too. And what I see is we want more than that. We want a partner that supports us in being our best self, where it's not a relationship on mediocrity or emotional drama, but where two or more are gathered, we are stronger together and have more to give in our life and contribute through our partnership. And so I love being part of that movement. It's a joy, it's an honor.
Well, I think that there's like that you're talking about what our culture, not just our culture, but what kind of the world is like today. There's this interesting paradox happening where there's more relational dis-ease than ever, possibly. At least it certainly feels that way. And I think a lot of the women that you speak to in terms of kind of like the women that are drawn to you, of women that have done a lot of personal development work, women that are transformational leaders like us who have been around the block, have done a lot of courses and this and that and studied and studied and studied. There's our standards are rising, and at the same time there's feels like the foundation for a relationship itself isn't meeting and isn't rising with us. So that's been part of my own process of saying, what's acceptable for me, what works for me in life, let alone just romantic relationship, but in life, and then meeting the world where it is. And that's a very messy place to be. That's a very messy place to date. So what you're talking about, actually having done research, actually having been through it yourself in a very systematic, clear way to lean back and go, what is real here and what's happening? I think that's really important, that it's not enough to take some kind of course. I was in a course a year or two ago, just like, well, let me do one more thing because I'm still single. And, it wasn't necessarily to fix myself, but it was to learn and grow. And, it was that group was like reinforced so much of the dysfunction. And yeah, I mean, that's just in my exhale, like that's what I experienced again and again and again. And there's a tremendous opportunity with what you are inviting women into, the conversation you're inviting women into, to be leaders, not only for ourselves and in our relationships, but I think on a broader scale in the world of how are we willing to really slow down to meet ourselves, to be clear in how we show up in integrity within our own beingness, our own femininity, our own grace, our own loving, and take responsibility then when we enter into dialogue with anyone, particularly with men. And how do we support ourselves in moving through that process in which we get to deepen in our dignity through the process, and also deepen our fulfillment and our pleasure and joy and loving. I just have so many women in my life that I can think of, including myself not long ago, where it feels so much like heavy lifting, and it doesn't have to be. And so can you just speak to that in terms, like,
Yeah. You know, what I when I listen to your words and take them in, it's like what my feeling and senses and quite strongly a conviction in my heart is that we are the pioneers. You know, the we are charting the new courses for where we are evolving into as a whole. As, you know, in term you, the work you do, the work that I do, the work that all of the other people that are rising forward, like we're creating a new model for being on the word, on the world. Like the definitions for success are changing, the definitions of
mhm,
relationships are changing, the definitions for, you know, masculine and feminine roles, that's all changing. So we're all part of this collective movement of doing our where there's we don't have a teacher, a model to follow. Like we
yes,
are literally bushwhacking and sort of figuring it out ourselves. And so to me, there's something extraordinary in that, in where in that's the messiness that comes in, because there are a lot of ways that
yeah.
we are exploring how to evolve into that which is, you know, that which our higher nature, and how we can activate this. Is that my little peach puff, Jess? Oh my goodness, she is like my muffin strudel. Hi, Jess. And so that's one of the things that just come forward to me, and especially within conscious women, this conversation regarding conscious love, conscious men, conscious women. Most of my demographic, if you will, are women that, like you were saying, that have been in the personal development work for a long time. They've been working on themselves for more of their life than not. There's a lot of awareness. And this is the group that I love working with the most, because what I've consistently found that the number one reason why conscious women struggle more in relationship than someone that may be happy, kind of walking around, you know, not fully aware, kind of like settling, you know, taking some crumbs, but good enough. Why conscious women are unhappy in relationship by and large, and why their relationships may not be reflecting all of their wisdom, is because, for as aware as we are, as a much brilliance as we have not yet psychologically integrated our awareness into our behaviors.
Mhm.
And so there is this big divide that I see specifically in the conscious woman or in the awakening woman, where while we have massive awareness, like we know who we are, we're connected to our goodness, like we have access to our deeper wisdom, yet the way we behave with men is not integrated and we don't even know it. So that, and that's the thing, that's where I love coming in, because if we have this self identity that walks around going, I am conscious or I'm devoted to my path, we then create these blind spots where we can't even see that we are, like we have this idea that we know it all, or like there's nothing else for us to learn and grow through. It's just because there's not enough good men. Like it's like finding a man, you know, good man, conscious man's like a needle in a haystack or something like that. And in there, there's this whole cognitive shield around where her opportunity is to actually integrate and bridge that gap. So that way her awareness is also lined up with her behaviors with men and how she relates to men, because there's all these ways that we walk around and we don't know we're giving off signals, like our facial expressions, our cues, like there's all of these subtle ways that we are exhibiting what the deeper where the deeper work is. And if our relationships, like our relationships are the mirror, and if we're experiencing any level of consistent shutdown, frustration, you know, we've been perennially single for decades,
Yep.
whatever, or same face, you know, different name, same face, different, same dynamic, that right there is telling us that there we have an opportunity to look deeper.
Yes.
And so to me, that's kind of what we're up to. That's the game that we're up to. Because
Well,
really it's
and
the game
add a
of
whole nother
loving.
level of complexity to it is that, um, you know, as men do show up, I've, like you were describing earlier, the quality of men as you became more conscious in how you were showing up, in the ways that you were being with yourself and in relationship, that the quality of men started to elevate, and that you had really wonderful people showing up. And yet what you're describing for the conscious woman, of how that's, you know, to whatever degree is applies to the individual, that there's not an integration, even for the conscious man that you know we want to call in, that applies to them too. So um anytime you're adding multiples to the mix, um the complexity increases, which to me invites us to slow down even more. And which is so powerful, and how you talked about really being an investigator into,
Mhm.
what's real here, and let me be really honest and transparent with myself around how I'm showing up and how I'm not. And
Yeah.
how honest am I being, how did I feel in my body, all of that,
Mm.
which are those signals that are so easy to just bypass and go, well, I mean, we have our rote responses to,
Mhm.
well, how was the date, versus like really dropping into a deep, um, thoughtful place.
And that's what I find we can't do on our own. We cannot see what we cannot see. And that's why I invest heavily in my own coaching, my own, guides and people that I go to. And I have been for decades because
Yes.
I know that the path that I'm on, my ego is tricky and I cannot see what I cannot see. And
Yeah.
the reality is for as aware as we are, we've got to get off of the men. And if we're calling in men that are emotionally unavailable, if we're calling in men that are, that maybe on the outside fit the model of our little checklist, which can actually be a smokescreen, but they're not emotionally attuned or they're not connected or if they're not good for our heart, the reality is that is reflecting something to us. Perhaps it's about, some level of unconscious ambivalence where we say we want relationship, but a part of ourself isn't so sure because we might have these ideas that relationship means that we'll, lose ourselves in love, we'll be dominated, we'll be enmeshed, or, whatever it is, there's probably something in there. It could be reflecting to us a deeper inability to receive and really trust into, like if I entrust another with my heart, will it be broken? If there was betrayal, with their heart broken, if there was mistrust. So the reality is the men that we call in, it's like it's a vibrational match for where we're at in consciousness.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest piece that I would love to just, sort of share from the mountaintops, especially for a lot of women that have done a lot of work and they've developed this narrative of like there aren't any good men. There aren't any good men. They're all taken, or it'd be like finding, like a needle in a haystack. And what my experience is that is just not true. The men that are coming in are just reflecting something about us. And so then that's the cue for us to get support that we need to see, why is it if I say that I want a loving relationship, I keep arguing? Or if I say that I want a loving relationship, I'm still single. Or if I say that I want a loving relationship, I keep getting ghosted. Like whatever it is, there's an opportunity in there for each one of us.
Can I know I'm just sensitive to time, but do you have a couple more minutes?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to speak to for a moment before we ended about um, the women out there who have found someone
Mm-hmm.
who, because it's not just there's all these conscious women seeking, and we're all sitting at home eating Ben and Jerry's, which I won't, no names here. I know that's a lot of us at different times in our lives, but for those of us who have met amazing men, we wouldn't be with them if they weren't amazing, and yet we have a desire, a yearning for more intimacy, more um, more congruency in our shared loving, um, more passion, more purpose, whatever the thing is. I know for me, it's so easy when challenges come up to use that on the other side of now being coupled, on the other side to say, well, that's just another angle of, where there's something wrong, or there's something to be fixed, or this shouldn't be happening. And so it's just as easy for those of us that are partnered to run a racket on ourselves at the same time. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to have you share a little bit about your perspective on that
For sure.
that piece.
Yeah, because it's not all puppies and rainbows once he comes in, right? Like there's the path of like creating, and then it's like, oh, here we are with another mortal, who has his own frailties, who has his own flaws, who has his own noble heart, and also has his own, hurts and pains and confusions and things like that. And so that, I mean, it doesn't stop. Like it gets exponentially better is what my experience is. Like there is nothing, and studies show this. It's like the number one predictor to longevity and overall happiness is long-term, nourishing, stable relationships. And so I'm not implying everyone needs a partner to be happy, yet there is something about where it just allows us to really flourish, especially when it's on a foundation of loving. And so in that area, what I perceive over and over again is the missing piece, especially into knowing how to nurture healthy relationships. Because it's one thing to attract or draw in. Then there's this whole piece of how do I cultivate a fertile environment for this, my relationship? How do I nurture my relationship? And what I have found, the number one thing is emotional maturity. And studies show that most Westerners regress to the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old when it comes to relationship challenges. Yeah. So we're walking around, I'm in a 43-year-old body. I can't remember how old you are, but it's like we're walking around in 35-year-old bodies, 45-year-old bodies, 55, 75, 85-year-old bodies with parts of us that are frozen in time where we stopped emotionally developing. It might have been when we were 8, when we were 12. Studies show that the baseline is 12. But for one reason or another, most of us stopped emotionally developing. Maybe it was because too much responsibility fell on our plate. Maybe it was because we were coddled and our parents didn't really let us, find our footing and like pick ourselves up when we stumbled. Maybe there was alcoholism. Maybe there was abuse. Maybe there was some level of trauma in the home. Yep. Whatever it was, circumstances were happening for many of us when we were young that caused us to just need to armor up and adapt to some coping mechanisms and just sort of like get through those formative years. And in relationship, that's where it comes out. And emotional regressing does not only show up through temper tantrums. That was always my thing. Like I really was good at temper tantrums, full disclosure here. But emotional regression also shows up with, ways that we've adapted and where we cope, where it might be like, oh, I can do this on my own. It might show up through withdrawal. It might show up through silencing ourselves. It might show up through putting on a pleasing face and not really saying what's going on and speaking into a meaningful conversation that might be uncomfortable. So there are so many different ways that we emotionally regress that cause us to really go back. We kind of, it's like we get identified with that younger one who at that time she may have felt powerless, or maybe she was unsafe. Maybe she was helpless. And until we in ourselves as women learn how to regain our emotional territory and know how to make our feelings safe to feel without shaming ourselves, without censoring ourselves, without dumping it on the man, without getting stuck in the hurt feelings and just spiraling it. To me, this is the number one key for relationship success, especially as women, is having a healthy relationship with our emotions where we know how to regulate ourselves, where we know how to process them, because men are not, they are not our punching bags. That's not a territory that they're bioneurologically wired, in the same way that we are to really understand the nuances of our feelings. And so bringing into the conversation by doing our work of knowing how to really connect with ourselves when we're having a meltdown, when hurt feelings. I have a process that's called the tending process that I walk women through in Foundations of Extraordinary Love, where it's all about learning how to reconnect with ourselves when we most need our own support. Because I found that the consistent pain that women experience beyond every other sort of factor in our lives is from the pain of our own self-betrayal and the pain of our own self-abandonment. When we disconnect in ourselves, we get stuck in the story that you don't love me or you're going to leave me or something's wrong with me. And then we spin out because in reality, we have left ourselves at that time. And we as women, I think part of how part of the model that we're evolving into on this planet requires that we learn how to emotionally resource ourselves. And then from there, how to go to our partner where it's like, hey, babe, I'm feeling this thing. But instead of dumping it on him, it's like, here's this thing I'm working through. Can you be with me? Or here's what I need. Yes. And it creates a whole different conversation. And you can see that I have a lot of like chomp for this conversation.
I could sit here for hours and
I know
and go on and on and on. And the thing that was really coming forward as I was listening to you share all of that, which resonated so deeply. It's just so many of my clients, whether we're directly working on relationship or not, it's the same, those same patterns, challenges, and then how it's expressed. And what just kept coming up was, as the love becomes present inside of ourselves or in the relationship, that it creates such a profound opportunity for those parts of ourselves to come forward. So the very nature, like me saying, you know, my deepest heartfelt desire is to be partnered in relationship, is also me in a way saying my deepest heartfelt desire is to enter into a space of loving so deep, so profound, that anywhere where I'm hurting, where I need healing, is revealed, is surfaced, comes forward, um, through that dynamic to be resolved. And it doesn't have to be, you know, that, you know, in some crazy dynamic with a partner, but
But sometimes it is too.
sometimes it is. And sometimes the more that there is safety and deep loving and deep intimacy, the more likely it has been, in my experience, that those things surface, that unresolved issues, unresolved upsets, hurts, all the dysfunctional thinking or perceptions or projections or trauma, it comes forward either in self or other, and is now in the soup of relationship to be addressed. And without that emotional resourcing that you're talking about so beautifully, um, it's a breeding ground for chaos and hurt,
Yeah, and that's where
and
we have
for
affairs. That's where we
re-traumatization or
divorce. Mm-hmm.
rejection and pain and abandonment. And we tend to act those things out until we come to a point where we don't. And
Yeah.
that's what I appreciate so much about the work that you do, and what you're making available to help people, so that we really can, individually and in relationship, and hopefully on a much broader scale of community and culture, start saying no more to that and saying yes to, you know, what we're really seeking, which is that intimacy and fulfillment and the love and compassion, the empathy with self and with other.
Because really,
So
the truth is, I mean, to me, the truth is healthy relationship is a byproduct, right? Like it's the
yes,
byproduct of a healthy relationship with ourselves, because there is no way one precedes the other. And so really, you know, relationship may be the path. What's one of the principles that I teach? It's like relationships are the vehicle. They are a vehicle that support us in our awakening, because like you were saying, you know, it catalyzes that which is in the shadow as much as it touches, like, you know, that the best parts of ourselves. Like it
yes,
touches our light and our shadow. And there's nothing like relationship that serves as both the crucible and the sanctuary. And yet to be able to know how to nurture the sanctuary, and also how to, hi Lauren, how to navigate the crucible, like that is the key, because the shit's gonna hit the fan, stuff's always gonna come up, things will always get activated. There's no getting away from that. But it's how, where we're coming from inside, the lens that we're seeing ourselves and our partners through, and what is the context for our loving relationship for how we work through things. That is what makes such a difference, such a difference.
and are you geared up for the adventure of love?
Yeah,
Have you packed your bag, and do you know what's in
right.
there, and do you have the ice pick and the rope and the whatever else you need to be able to take that journey all the way to your destination, and in a healthy, joyful way, as best as any of us can. And uh, your offerings in the world really set us up for that. So before we complete, I'd love you to share just a little bit.
If you're watching this and if you feel a strong like calling in your heart where you're like, yes, this is for me, I would love to invite you in, welcome you in. It's Foundations of Extraordinary Love program that really walks a woman through the psycho-spiritual developmental process that's required in transforming our relationship to relationship. So that way we can call in relationships that mirror more of our light versus our shadow. And so it really walks us through, you know, releasing, looking at where we might be telling ourselves stories, clearing out old assumptions, you know, old stories, old assumptions, going in and supporting releasing some of the feelings that might be recycling in here, having us feel mistrust or lack of hope, or just where we get like, inside of ourselves. We're going to clear that. It's really an opportunity for a blank slate. This used to be a year-long process, and throughout the past 14 years of I finesse it and up level it every year. I've condensed this year-long process that 100%, if you show up and if you do it and you do the work, it will literally transform your entire experience of relationships, so you're more available for loving relationship. And the reality is, for years I'd been turning people away because my private work, it starts at $50,000. A session with me starts at 1,000. My long-term program is a minimum investment of 10K. And so I just wanted to make my work available to as many women. Literally, I just wanted to make this available. I didn't want it to be cost prohibitive. It's an extremely high value program at a very accessible price. So if you're feeling the call, just drop us a comment here or go to foundationsofextraordinarylove.com and we can usher you in. It's a beautiful, we meet. I really have created a beautiful space for women to come together where we all have a chance to be seen and heard. It's through a Zoom platform. We'll meet once a week and we'll just walk you through, I'll walk you through a really elegant process from there.
For those of you seeking love, I mean, I'm not here to just be an advertisement for Gabriella, but you're one of my dearest. I mean, I just have hold you in such high regard. And for those of you women out there, because this is specifically for women who are seeking relationship or who are in relationship and want to transform either your experience within it or some aspect of it, this is a no-brainer. Gabriella is I would trust her with my relationship in a heartbeat. And she's a wonderful, very highly skilled teacher. Just being here, I think that's evident, but there are few people that I would advocate for in this way, and it's just take her up on this invitation, because who knows how this will transform in the future. And love is now, so get in on that, or reach out to Gabriella in some other way and connect with her personally. I know she'd love to hear from you, as would I always. So much love. Thank you so much, Gabriella, for chatting today. Lots of love to you. I'm so glad we figured out the technology, and lots of love to everybody else. Take care.
Bye, Jess. Bye, Lauren. Bye, Miguel. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.